MaRy Diaz Castillo was born in Hasty, Colorado in 1935. I'm the older of two siblings. My sister Grace, she's the middle child, and my brother Jess. I came to California in 1945 at 10 years old. My father had been to Ventura prior to moving, and he'd always said he liked the climate in Ventura, and that's why he moved us to Ventura. My family and my parents' best friends all came to Ventura. My mother died when I was very young, and this lady friend told my father, "Bring me your children and I'll raise them." She raised us, and we lived with them for a long time until my father remarried. My father married one of the Barone ladies for a short time, so that when we came to Ventura, Mr. Barone had this big lot that had a front house on it and a house in the center of the lot close to the Montiel family on Brook Street. In the back there was this tiny house that had a eucalyptus tree that grew right through the house. My brother used to hide and seek back there all the time, and this was our little house at the time. I was around 13 or 14 at the time. On one side, our neighbors were the Elwell family. On the other side were the Carmona ladies. One of them married someone with the last name of Alvaro. In the front part of that lot, I remember that they had a smokehouse, and I think Victor Carmona used to smoke fish there. On the other side of that was the Rodriguez family, and they had a big fancy house. My dad became friends with Herb Salazar and Mr. Carmona. I can remember them sitting on a bench with my father and my father-in-law, Mr. Barone. That house was right by the railroad tracks, and Mr. Salazar's picture, Por Vida, is on the mural. They would all sit there together every night, and my dad would read to them the La Opinión Spanish newspaper. I think Mr. Salazar had a problem with his sight, and Mr. Barone couldn't read or write, so my father would take the time to do this for them. My father was a laborer, and he worked many years for the Hall Brothers Construction. He worked for McLeod for many, many years. After he retired, he helped my brother get into his own construction business. The first school I attended was May Henning Elementary School. I remember, before coming to Ventura, the schools where I went before, they were segregated, so they didn't mix the Mexicans with the whites. For us, it was a shock that we could sit anywhere in the classroom. I remember Eddie Grego came up to me and said, "Come here, MaRy, I want you to meet some friends." So he gathered his friends, and we went under this big pine tree, and he introduced me to Bea Aramillo, Sally Aramillo, and Nadine Garcia, and we all became friends. We had a lot of friends go to Holy Cross School, too. I was at May Henning through the 6th grade. After 6th grade, I went to Ventura High School. At the time, Ventura High was where Cabrillo Middle School is now. It used to be from 7th to 10th grade, and then you would go to Ventura College, which is where Ventura High School is now. I started working at a very young age. My stepmother would do the housework, and when she couldn't go, she would pull me out of school to clean the houses for her. I was pretty good at house cleaning. I used to work for a lady by the name of Carrie Eaton. She lived on Laurel Street, and she had a great big house. Every Saturday I would go there, and every time she would pay me with silver dollars. Doing housework in those days, 50 cents an hour was the rate, so coming home with silver dollars, I was happy. When I was about 16, I went to work for Scott's Apparel on Main Street near J.C. Penney. It was owned by Mr. Henry Gruen and Morton Springware and considered high-end and a high-style store. I worked there for about 8 years. I would press the clothes as they came in from the factory. I also did all the pressing for the window displays, and a man by the name of Joe would dress the mannequins for the window display. I remember Mr. Gruen was very giving, and at Christmas time he would give us clothes. He gave me the most beautiful red coat with big old buttons on it. One year he gave me this black strapless dress that I just thought was out of this world. He was also very generous on our discounts. I remember Mr. Gruen had this policy that one of us had to go shop at his competitors for price checks. At that time, the other apparel stores in the vicinity were Jack Rose, Jan's, Burger's, Great Eastern, and American Clothing for price checks. I guess one store didn't want to be lower than the other one, so I would go to Jack Rose, Jan, and Burger's to check the prices. Back then, people seemed to dress nicer and always look nice. You would wear hats and gloves no matter where you went. I had a lot of nice hats, but I ended up giving them all away. Now, I wish I had some of them because they are in fashion. It was nice to dress up because you could show off what your attire was. Of course, when we would go out, if we didn't have a certain dress, we would borrow one from our friends. We would go to Teen Time, which was known as the Old Bathhouse on California Street. In the summer, they would put out a jukebox, and we would dance and have fun. My girlfriend Margie and I would go down there, and then we would rush home before our parents came home. She and I did a lot of things together. We'd go shopping, and she'd stay at my house for weeks because my dad didn't let me stay out of the house. In the evenings, I remember going to the fairgrounds because it was close to our home, and we'd walk down there and walked home. We would have a nice time because a lot of teenagers went there. I remember a friend of mine, Evelyn Lorenzana, and we were going to a party. Well, she had never put on a pair of high-heeled shoes. And we decided we would go to Seaside Park so she could practice walking in her high heels. She would walk back and forth right there by all those smelly horses. And, of course, we would just go out other times just to walk around. We went to the Mission Theater, which is now the Knights of Columbus on Figueroa Street. We also went to the American Theater that was on Main Street. We would save our soda bottles to sell them, and then we would have money for our popcorn and our entrance tickets. I remember Frances Barone. Her father spoke only Spanish, and he would not let her do any homework or go out until she made her high stacks of tortillas. My father would not let us speak English at home, so we could retain our Spanish language, and I think my sister and I are pretty good at it. My brother, I think, chops it up a little bit. I don't remember going to the fair when it was going on when I was young. Maybe we just couldn't afford it, or maybe my dad just didn't let us go. Later on, when I got married, I remember going. I do remember a circus that would come to town, and they would camp out on Garden Street. For a long time, we lived across the street next to Maggie Palacios and Eleanor Olivas. She lived on the other side. In the evening, they would put up a white sheet, and they showed movies, and everyone would gather around and watch the movies. He was a very nice man to do that because there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood that couldn't afford to go to the movie theater. Another great time was going to the Green Mill Ballroom. I went to some rock and roll dances, and I went to the Mexican dances, and of course, the big band dances. It was the big band era, and there were so many I don't remember them all. Tex Benaki, Tommy Dorsey, and Harry James, just a few I remember. The Eagle Hall, or Eagle Lodge, I don't remember. It was on Main and Palm Street. It used to be a nightclub, and they would have entertainment upstairs. For my 18th birthday, a bunch of my friends decided to have a birthday party for me, and we had a heck of a good time there. We played a lot of records and danced and ate cake. One time, we were at the Eagles Hall, and my future husband told my sister, "I'm going to marry your sister." And my sister said, "No, you're crazy. You're not." So I think we dated about 6 months, and then we got married. The Diaz family lived right in the Tortilla Flats on Maida Street. We had already moved from Brooks Street and were now living on Maida Street across from Gilbert. Often he would stop at our house and talk to my father. I knew who he was, but then he would come by and talk to my dad, and I didn't like it. And I used to tell my dad, "Why are you talking to that old man?" I would tell him, "I can't even go outside and shake the rugs." I ended up marrying him to find out later that he was much older than I, and I felt, oh no, what have I done? His family lived close to Salad Bowl Curve, right there, near Garden. Our neighbors at the time were the Palacios, Eleanor Olivas, and Barbara Escorino. I remember a black lady living there, but I don't remember her name. There was also a lady that had a very old car that I liked. She wasn't a friendly person, so I didn't get to know her. Across the tracks on the corner, I remember another black family, but I don't remember their name. Shortly after we were married, my husband was transferred to Lompoc to work, so we had to leave Ventura for a short time. When we came back, we lived at 160 East Ramona Street for a short time. Our next move was on Delaware Street, and we lived there for 8 years. Gilbert wasn't happy living there, so we moved to Center Street, and we were there for 32 years. Gilbert's siblings were Ellen Grigo Diaz, she was the oldest, then Miguel Diaz, then Gilbert, my husband, Edward Diaz, and then MaRy and Vincent Diaz. I almost forgot that there was Herbert Huero, and he died in the 70s. Things were a little tight, so I thought that I would get a part-time job for 1 or 2 years. I told my husband I wouldn't work for more than that. I saw this ad in the paper for food services. I applied, and I got hired. The first year I cashiered. At the end of the school year, they called me into the office and they asked if I would like to have a snack bar. I said, well, I didn't know if I could handle that, and I asked, what does it entail? And she said, oh, some days you'll make 17, 20 loaves of bread into sandwiches. And I thought, I'll never be able to do that. But I took it, and I think I did that for maybe 10 years at Diaz. A principal from Los Angeles came to visit our school and saw me in action and said, why, aren't you the... And then there's a blank. And then I was very fortunate working at Diaz, and I was able to achieve upward mobility because of my work ethic. I went through a lot of managers, and I ended up staying for 24 years. I have been honored with a bronze plaque dedicated to my honor that hangs in the cafeteria. After I retired, I worked at numerous schools in Ventura and fed generations of Venturans. I was able to see students grow up, and when I started seeing their children, I felt it was time for me to retire. Everyone would come by and say, MaRy, take care of my kids, or, you know what to do if you don't have the money. Some people didn't understand why I would want to work at Diaz because it had a bad reputation, but I liked it. Well, I worked for Ralph Romero over here at the Fiesta. The Fiesta being on Thompson Boulevard in Figueroa. I worked there for many years. I had the night shift, and my sister-in-law had the day shift. Then, on the next corner was Rojos, which belonged to Ralph's wife, Madeline, and my girlfriend Margie would work there, and I'd go over there and help her. It was a completely different menu. They had chicken and all that stuff. Actually, I think Rojos came first. I think so. And then they built the Fiesta after that. Wasn't Rojos the one that had been a gas station? Exactly. Then he had to fill those tanks with sand to make it open. Exactly. And Joe Mitchell, who worked for McMahon's, was a partner in that. Well, he was the Joe. That was the Joe, because Ra was Rolf. Ra Ho. Or so it was Ralph and Joe. That's how they came up with the name. Let me ask you this, because I'm curious, because there's stuff on the internet now these days. Are corn burritos a Ventura thing? Because everybody in Ventura loves corn burritos, and outside of Ventura, people say, what are you talking about? They can't picture it. Yeah, it must be a Ventura thing, because I think I went to work for Ralph, and that's where I learned to make them, at the Fiesta. Moses. That was mid-60s, you think? MaRy. Somewhere in there. But I think, I'm not sure, that Foster Freeze may have been the first ones to sell them. So I learned to make them at Ralph's, and that's when my sister opened up her place, and I taught her how to make them. I only have one son, Carlo. He works for my brother in construction. My father always said we had to give back to the community, so in a sense we try to. Good friends. It seemed everyone would help one another. And I know the Barrios family. They were always very good to us. At the time, when we first came to Ventura, I didn't really know Lupe Gonzalez, but then in high school we got to know each other. She and I went to a prom. We had fun dates, and we went to the Santa Paula prom. If you didn't have it, you got it from other people. You borrowed it, so it was a good time. I wish things were like that today, but they're not. I remember down at the plaza, if you had too much of one thing, you would pass it on to someone else, the same as with clothes. Yeah, I think maybe we should explain something here because despite of it being Ventura School for Girls, this was more like a lock-up detention center that went back, I don't know how far, but I know it was in the early 1940s, and that was during the Zoot Suit era. I also believe it was a statewide facility, so girls who got in trouble across the state. I had a friend who lived at the foot of the hill, and she said, oh, at least once a month someone would escape. And they had big orchards, and here comes these dogs yapping, looking for whoever had managed to get out of there. So yeah, it was a lockup in our time. Oh, I remember something that happened at Tortilla Flats. The Barones were a big family, and they had that one brother named Tony. Well, one day he disappeared, and we couldn't find him. He was already a teenager, and the father looked for him all over, and he sent somebody to San Jose to see if he was up there with his other brothers, and he wasn't. And then they come to find out he had been with Raymond Taveras, Jesse Arenas, and Bud Dickinson. Well, Tony had overdosed, and they hid him in that house on the corner, right here across from Seaside Park. They kept him there until Taveras went to... That's blank. Yeah, it sure did. I never heard of such a thing. Mother and son. I just couldn't picture how it happened. Well, I guess she hired these two guys from Camarillo or somewhere, and I don't think the girl was dead when they buried her here, huh? And from what I've read, they had a big trial in Ventura, and they finally put her to rest.